I am literally recording this without a script while painting a Deathwatch Watchmaster. Why? Because I saw a post on Twitter that got me thinking about it. I'm going to review the first tabletop RPG I ever had contact with. World of Warcraft, the role-playing game. Yeah, I used to play WoW, and I got out of that before the whole, Blitzchung incident, and I have not bought a Blizzard Activision game since. Which is kind of sad given Diablo 2 was kind of my growing up point, but, anywho, let's, talk about this. How is it? Spoilers for the ending, it's terrible. Like, ungodly bad. Looking online, Amazon will sell you a brand new copy of this book that is out of print for $230 US dollars. So a lot more if you're Canadian or even Australian. It will sell you a used copy for about 75 USD. None of that is any good. But hey, you get a bunch of races in it. You get the Ironforge dwarves, the high elves, the night elves, and the gnomes, and the humans for the Alliance. And for the Horde, you've got goblins, orc, tauren, jungle trolls, and the undead Forsaken. Of course, keep in mind that this came out at about 3E 3.5 era, which the character sheet really shows because it's just straight up a 3.5 character sheet, despite this being the second edition of World of Warcraft, the tabletop role-playing game. But yeah, you got options, and in all honesty, it's quite simple to change option or modify options as well. How many classes are there? Well, there is Arcanist, Barbarian, Healer, Hunter, Paladin, Rogue, Scout, Tinker, and Warrior. What, no mage or warlock or shaman or druid or priest? No, those are things. Those are things. They're subclasses. So if you want to play a druid, you have to be a healer. If you want to play a... To be fair, with the warlock and the mage, they, in-game, as of, I believe, either Wrath of the Lich King or Cataclysm, they were both only DPS, even though they, in previous editions, they were actually capable of tanking as well with their pets. Necromancer is also a thing for Arcanist, which I can't help but wonder about that, because the only necromancers in World of Warcraft are NPCs. Although I guess you could argue the Death Knights are also necromancers, but I really wouldn't argue that. Healers are druids, priests, and shamans. Hunter is your DPS, Paladin is basically required tanking, can't really heal. Rogue and Scout are basically the same thing, though one gets pickpocketing and one doesn't. Tinker is your Bombardier, and Warrior is another tank. Then you got the prestige classes. Archmage of the Kirin Tor, Assassin, Beastmaster, Berserker, Duelist, Elven Ranger, Fellsworn, Gladiator, Infiltrator, and Mounted Warriors. Some of these require specific classes and specific races, which is a bad idea for prestige classes. If you want to play an Eldritch Knight in 3.5, you can take Fighter or Barbarian or literally any class and just 3 to 5 levels in an Arcanist. Literally any arcane spellcasting class. It doesn't have specific requirements like that. You just need to be able to cast so high level spells. I think it's first level spells, I believe, but it might be third. I can't quite recall, and I'm not gonna go into it. Each class obviously has its very specific armors. Healers, for whatever reason, are stuck with the very light cloth armor, despite the fact the druid could wear leather and the shaman chainmail in World of Warcraft. And each one of those two spellcasters has their own subclass spell list. So the mage doesn't have the same spell list as the warlock, despite the fact they really do in a video game perspective, which is why 4th edition is the way it was, but whatever. Druids, priests, and shamans have their own spell lists as well, and the paladin also gets a spell list, but the hunter doesn't. In all honesty, I understood past tense the lore of World of Warcraft up until Warlords of Draenor, because that one basically shot everything in the face and foot. But we're not going to be going into that. If you know literally anything about the game, whether it's from just Warcraft 3 or World of Warcraft, or even the movie, which admittedly they could have done a lot better, I've got my own complaints about it from an audio perspective, just because I trained myself for that. Why did they use an echo instead of an actual growl? But if you know anything about this setting, you can make a campaign around it. Maybe you're playing as, or your group's part of the Horde, and they need to remove the Scarlet Monastery guys. I can't remember what they were called. Maybe you're part of the Alliance, and you're trying to remove a orc invasion of Ashenvale or whatever. Of course, then you got the goblins, which are kind of neutral, really. I did mention they were part of the Horde, but before, I believe, Cataclysm, they were anyone. They would sell to anyone. They were actually most commonly working with the Alliance. Whatever. Honestly, this is just a rip of 3.5, which normally I wouldn't have so many complaints about it, other than the fact that there's really not builds. Sure, there's feats you can use. Sure, you can use prestige classes. But Druid was capable of every single role. Magic damage, melee damage, tanking, and healer. But in this one, you have one role as a healer. Every time I've tried to play a healer in the past, I've been forced to be a healer. Or I've tried to play a druid in the past. In 5th edition and 3.5, I've always been forced to be a healer. And I don't want to do that. In World of Warcraft, I was playing a druid Tauren, or Tauren druid, as the bear druid. In fact, at one point, I actually got to number 8 on the world rankings list of best bear druid, which admittedly at the time, I think that was Mists of Pandaria era. Nobody was tanking as a bear, so meh. Or was it Cataclysm that no one was tanking as a bear? Either way, at some point I was number 8 for a while, and I mean, that was only like a week until the weekly reset, so whatever. This game pretty well forces you into certain builds. The Scout and the Rogue are basically the same class, but the Scout specializes in not being seen, while the Rogue specializes in stealing things. The Hunter is just your range DPS, literally the only range DPS in the game. Tinker is essentially your Bombardier. Warrior is forced to be a tank along with Paladin. There's probably a whole nother book about this that I don't have. Looks like there's a Manual of Monsters, an Alliance and Horde Compendium, which adds Blood Elves and Wildhammer Dwarves, along with the Death Knight, Dwarven Avatar, Marksman, and... Okay, so this was made at a point when Death Knights were a thing, so Wrath of the Lich King era, I guess? Given Blood Elves weren't even a named thing until Warcraft 3, and then World of Warcraft added them. And then there's Wargames rules, apparently, in the Alliance and Horde Compendium. There's also a Magic and Mayhem book, Land of Conflict, Shadow and Light book. Okay, there's a lot to this game, and some of it does well, but the first taste I have of it immediately shoots me in the face with it, because it restricts certain classes to certain roles, and I don't like that. I don't like it when a tabletop game says, oh yeah, you're playing the hunter type character, the ranger, well, you have to be a DPS, a ranged DPS. It's why I don't like 5th edition for that very reason. It feels restricting to me. I don't like that this game is telling me, oh yeah, you're a druid, so you have to be healing. You can't polymorph into a bear. Why? That was their whole shtick. And then I don't like how prestige classes are restricted either. In 3.5, a prestige class basically said, oh yeah, you got these requirements right here. Oh, it's a rage ability like the Rage Mage? Well, you can either be raging, or you can frenzy, or you can have a spell that makes you rage, and you need to be able to cast so high a level. So you had options, but this doesn't let you have the options. I don't like this game. It's not very well done, and it's not because of the company itself. The company that made this one is something called Sword Sorcery, or Sorcery Sword, is it? Sword Sorcery. Which makes me think of the game Sword and Sorcery, but I don't think it's the same thing. The character sheet is a 3rd edition one. This is 2nd edition of the game, of this tabletop game. It's restricting, it forces you to do certain builds, and it's just not a whole lot in the way of choices. Honestly, I give it about a 60%. Like, it can be fun, but you need to know what you're doing and change a lot of the restrictions in order to do so. Now I'm gonna finish my Watchmaster, so, shove off.